Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Office on Violence Against Women Fiscal Year 2024 Transitional Housing for Victims of Sexual Assault, Domestic Violence, and Stalking Solicitation Pre-Application Information Session. On behalf of the Office on Violence Against Women, the Transitional Housing Unit welcomes you to this call. The Transitional Housing Unit consists of our supervisor, Michelle Brickley, who unfortunately cannot join us for today's session. On the call, we have Myrta Charles, Dana Marshall, Charlena Brady, Christina Baccaro, Kelly Walsh, Kelly Moreno, and me, Sharon Elliott. In today's call, we will cover the following topics for the fiscal year 2024 Transitional Housing Solicitation: program description, purpose versus priority areas, transitional housing and support services design, priority areas, basic minimum requirements, and successful application tips. So with that, I will turn it over to Myrta Charles to provide an overview of the OVW Transitional Housing Program.
Thank you, Sharon. This is Myrta Charles. I'm happy to join you today to talk about the Transitional Housing Assistance Grant for Victims of Domestic Violence, Dating Violence, Stalking, and Sexual Assault Program. OVW's Transitional Housing Program funds organizations to assist victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking, known as the VAWA crimes. Those who are homeless or in need of transitional housing as a result of a situation of the VAWA crimes. The Transitional Housing Program provides funding for survivors in need of transitional housing, short-term housing assistance, and related supportive services for 6 to 24 months. Eligible applicants are states, units of local government, Indian tribes, and other organizations with a documented history of effective work concerning sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. Let's talk about the federal award information. The OVW Transitional Housing Award period is 36 months. The award period will begin October 1st, 2024 for fiscal year 2024. Awards will be made for up to $500,000. New and continuation grantees can apply. However, be mindful of the following limitations and restrictions. Recipients of FY 2022 or FY 2023 OVW Transitional Housing Awards are not eligible to apply as a lead applicant or as a partner or subrecipient in an FY 2024 Transitional Housing proposal. Additionally, a partner or a subrecipient of an FY 2022 or 2023 award are not eligible to apply as a lead applicant or partner or subrecipient in FY 2024 proposal. Current grantees who have more than 50% of their award remaining under their current OVW Transitional Housing Award will not be eligible to apply for an FY 2024 without adequate justification. Purpose area versus priority area. Purpose areas are those indicated as part of the OVW Transitional Housing Program. OVW priority areas are those receiving office-wide priority for this year's solicitation. Purpose areas. Funds under this program must be used for one or more of the following purposes. 1, transitional housing, including funding for operating expenses of newly developed or existing transitional housing and/or short-term housing assistance, including rental or utility payments assistance, and assistance with related expenses such as payment of security deposits and other costs incidental to relocation to transitional housing. And provide comprehensive voluntary support services designed for survivors fleeing a situation of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and/or stalking, and helps victims transition into permanent, affordable housing. Service design. For the purposes of the Office on Violence Against Women, transitional housing is housing with voluntary services that are designed for survivors offered for at least 6 months and no more than 24 months of support. Transitional housing can be offered in the following models: communal housing, which is a common shared spaces; clustered site housing, individual apartment-style units in a building; scattered site housing, third-party operated rental units where rent is paid directly to the landlord by the program. Transitional housing can be provided in facilities that are owned by the applicant and units that are leased by the applicants, or by providing rental assistance for units leased directly to victims. Support services offered should help transitional housing participants locate and secure permanent housing, secure employment, and integrate into a community. Examples of support services include employment counseling, occupational training, transportation counseling, child care services, safety planning, case management, and other assistance. Support services must be offered to all transitional housing participants on a voluntary basis. OVW-funded transitional housing projects cannot mandate that recipients participate in support services as a condition of receiving housing. Please note, these are the only purposes this grant may be used for. VAWA confidentiality. Recipients of OVW funds are required to abide by the confidentiality requirements as outlined in the Violence Against Women Act. VAWA requires all recipients to protect and keep private all personally identifying information about a survivor or their dependents. Award recipients should be required to obtain informed consent prior to sharing any information learned about a survivor or their dependents to another agency or anyone not affiliated with the recipient agency. This provision would also cover any sharing with an area homeless management information system, known as HMIS, other advocacy centers, or any other agency requesting information from the recipient agency. The only exception to this provision would be if there was a state or local law requiring the recipient agency to share that information. Please visit the OVW website to view the confidentiality notice form for more information. Please note that this form is a required component of a complete application. Voluntary service. All services provided by recipient of an OVW transitional housing funds must be offered in a voluntary services manner. This means that recipients cannot require that a survivor participate in services to be deemed eligible for housing or supportive services through the OVW Transitional Housing Program. Length of services. Transitional housing with support services must be offered for 6 to 24 months. Survivors may request an extension for an additional 6 months of housing at the end of their stay if they were unable to locate permanent housing despite their good faith effort. This means that housing and support services in limited circumstances may be available for up to 30 months. It's important to note here that OVW transitional housing funds cannot be used to extend shelter, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, financial assistance, permanent subsidies, mortgage payments, or any other housing-related fee that is intended to be temporary. These funds can only be used to provide housing for 6 to 24 months simultaneously, accompanied by voluntary support services. OVW priority areas. 1 is to expand economic justice and financial advocacy for survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking, including as a tool for violence prevention. And 2 are projects primarily serving underserved populations. OVW Priority Area 1 looks to expand economic justice and financial advocacy for survivors of VAWA crimes as a tool for violence prevention. To qualify for this priority, an applicant must propose projects that demonstrate strong partnerships with workforce development or job training programs, provide a detailed plan for assisting survivors toward graduated economic empowerment and survivor autonomy while using a voluntary services model, and submit budgets for up to $550,000 for a 36-month period. OVW Priority 2 focuses on projects primarily serving underserved populations. To qualify for this statutory priority area, an applicant must propose projects that primarily serve individuals from underserved populations who are victims of the VAWA crimes. Provide a detailed plan identifying the underserved populations being addressed. Describe how the project will provide specific services to victims from the identified underserved populations within the proposed project service area. Describe gaps in current services and barriers for victims seeking services. Demonstrate strong partnerships with organizations with expertise and a history of services to each underserved community. Submit budgets for up to $550,000 for a 36-month period. Priority area clarification. Applicants may apply for both priority areas 1 and 2, expanding economic justice and primarily serving underserved populations. If an applicant chooses to apply for both priority area 1 and 2, they must attach an additional page describing how they will address that priority area. Please see page 20 of the FY 2024 solicitation for more information. Additionally, the applicant must submit a budget allocating up to an additional $50,000 of funds per priority area. This means that an applicant may request up to a total of $100,000 in grant funds to address both priority areas 1 and 2. Please note that applications are not guaranteed priority funding. Only applications that successfully address the priority area will receive priority funding. I'm going to hand this off to my colleague, Charlena Brady, to review the prohibited activities and limits to funding. Charlena?
Thank you. I will be reviewing with you the activities that compromise victim safety, out-of-scope activities, unallowable activities, and the limited use of funds. Activities that compromise victim safety. OVW does not fund activities that jeopardize victim safety, deter or prevent physical or emotional healing for victims, or allow offenders to escape responsibility for their actions. Applications that propose any such activities may receive a deduction in points during the review process or may be eliminated from consideration. Information on activities that compromise victim safety and recovery or undermine offender accountability may be found in the solicitation companion guide. Out of scope activities. The following activities are out of scope: research projects, prevention activities, family violence, housing retention, emergency shelter or short-term housing, and assistance that is offered for less than 6 months. These activities are deemed out of program scope and will not be supported by this program's funding. More information and details about out-of-scope activities can be found on page 8 of the solicitation. Limited use of funds. The following activities can be supported only in limited circumstances. Legal services. Recipients may provide legal assistance as part of providing services to victims. Use of grant funds for legal assistance to victims must be related to matters involving the survivor's victimization or matters in which the survivor's access to housing is impacted. Applicants requesting funds for legal assistance should describe this option in the "What will be done" section. Please see proposal narrative for more information. Legal assistance costs must not exceed 10% of the total project cost. Next is the purchase and/or lease of vehicles. Use of grant funds for the purchase and/or lease of a vehicle by the grant recipient or project partner will be considered on a case-by-case basis. If an applicant is requesting funds for a vehicle, a lease purchase analysis must be submitted with the application and the cost included in the budget and budget narrative. Grant funds may not be used for the purchase of and/or down payment on a vehicle for private ownership by a victim in a transitional housing program. Services for children. Grant funds may be used to provide direct services to minors who meet the statutory eligibility criteria for transitional housing services, or to provide direct services to children where such services are an ancillary part of providing transitional housing and supportive services to the child's or legal guardian who is a victim of VAWA crimes. And lastly, the limited use for counseling services. Funds may be used for counseling services designed to enable survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, dating violence, or stalking to locate and secure permanent housing, secure employment, or integrate into a community. Grant funds may not be used for inpatient mental health services, mental health evaluations, prescription mental health drug evaluations, or for long-term treatment of a mental health condition. Now, Kelly will review the federal award information with you.
Award period and amount. All awards are subject to the availability of appropriated funds. There is no guarantee that funds will be available in the future. Proposals to use grant funds for housing alone or for both housing and support services may submit budgets for up to $500,000. Proposals to use grant funds for support services only may submit budgets for up to $400,000. Proposals addressing priority area, expand economic justice, and financial advocacy for survivors of VAWA crimes, including as a tool for violence prevention, may submit budgets for up to $550,000. Proposals addressing the priority area, primarily serve underserved populations may submit budgets for up to $550,000. OVW expects to prioritize up to 4 projects under this priority. Proposals addressing both expand economic justice and financial advocacy for survivors of VAWA crimes, including as a tool for violence prevention, and primarily serve underserved populations, may submit budgets for up to $600,000. All budgets must outline costs for the entire award period of 36 months. Mandatory program requirements. Participate in an OVW-sponsored training and technical assistance. Recipients may be expected to dedicate some OVW-funded time and resources to participating in an assessment or evaluation. Post-award submission of policies, procedures, and rules governing the organization's transitional housing program and related support services. Offer transitional housing and support services for at least 6 months and no more than 24 months with OVW grant funds. Offer support services only to individuals receiving transitional housing other than follow-up services. Offer follow-up services for transitional housing clients who secure permanent housing. Follow-up services are limited to advocacy, support groups, case management, and minimal financial assistance, provided for at least 3 months, but not more than 1 year. Significantly involve a victim service provider in the implementation of the project, including the development and review of all policies and procedures and the provision of support services. Ensure that any staff, partner staff, or service providers working with transitional housing clients are trained to work with victims of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking. Send the project coordinator and 1 other key staff member to an in-person OVW grantee orientation. Send key staff to an in-person OVW-sponsored training on voluntary services. Agree to provide transitional housing to their clients without requiring participation in support services. Notify OVW of any changes to the source of funding used to provide OVW grant-funded transitional housing and/or support services. Compensate at least 1, if not all, of their project partners for time and travel to participate in project development, training, and implementation. If a partner is a state or unit of local government and the partnership duties are conducted within the course of the agency's regular scope of work, the applicant does not need to compensate the partner if the partner offers this arrangement and an explanation of this arrangement is included in the application. I'm now going to hand this off to Christine Moore from the OVW Grants and Financial Management Division, GFMD, to discuss one of the requirements that are needed for GFMD.
Thanks, Kelly. So the next couple of slides, we're going to focus on aspects of your application that relate to the documents that our financial team at the Grants Financial Management Division, or like Kelly said, GFMD, reviews. More specifically, we'll discuss some items that GFMD has identified from prior year's applications that could help with expediting our review process. So for today, we're going to highlight certain aspects of the pre-award risk assessment and provide you with a link to a detailed webinar on how to develop the budget that will be included in your application. So first, we'll highlight the items identified in the summary data sheet, which is completed by all applicants. Specifically, 2 items that we want to focus on are the single audit response and the IRS 3-step safe harbor procedure. So OVW requests that all applicants provide a statement as to whether they have expended $750,000 or more in federal funds during their last fiscal year. If they have, they then indicate that and also specify the end date of their last fiscal year. In the past, GFMD has found that applicants don't always include all of this information. So again, please ensure that this question is answered in its entirety on that summary data sheet. Specifically, it's question number 3. Another item that we're going to highlight here from the solicitation is specifically for nonprofit organizations. If you use the IRS 3-step safe harbor procedure to determine your executive's compensation, you are required to provide a disclosure letter. You're going to want to refer to the solicitation for further details and a link to a sample letter. There are 4 required parts of that disclosure letter, and the sample letter provided outlines all 4 of those parts. So please be sure to follow the sample and provide a response to each and every part. The next item that we're going to discuss here is that pre-award risk assessment questionnaire, which assists us at GFMD during our pre-award risk assessment review for all of the applications. Each applicant must prepare a response to all 11 questions, and note that each question is going to have multiple parts to it. So we've noticed from prior years that applicants don't always fully answer all the parts of the questions, which in turn requires us at GFMD to reach out to that applicant, which could delay funding decisions. Some of the most common issues that we've encountered have been for, as an example, question number 2, where the applicant will indicate that they do indeed have internal policies, but they don't then provide a brief list of topics covered in those policies and procedures. Another example on question 3, some applicants fail to provide a brief summary of the organization's process for tracking expenditures, and more specifically, whether or not that organization tracks the budgeted versus actual expenditures. So those are just a few examples, but in general, you want to make sure that you read each piece of each question and provide a full and comprehensive response. So this next slide coming up, it's going to quickly highlight some resources that are available as you're creating that budget that needs to be submitted with your application. Over the last couple of years, GFMD has developed a detailed webinar presentation on how to develop a budget to be submitted with an OVW application. This presentation will address some of the challenges that you may face with your budgets, and it'll also provide some insight on OVW's budget review process. And the webinar can be found at the link on the slide. Next up, the resources for the uniform guidance, which can be found at 2 CFR 200, which you can find anywhere online with any of your search engines that you prefer. And lastly, the 2 resources we want to mention are the DOJ financial guide and that solicitation itself. So we know that this can be a lot of information to process, and know that we are available to you to answer any questions about what we've discussed here today. So you can reach us at the Grants Financial Management Division Help Desk, either by phone or by email. The phone number is 888-514-8556, and the email is ovw.gfmd@usdoj.gov. And that wraps up my piece. So I'm going to hand this off to Kelly to discuss application tips and the basic minimum requirements to review.
Thank you so much, Christine. And let's go ahead and move on to discussing application tips. So what will be covered? Well, in this section of the presentation, we will discuss qualified applications, required partnerships, and mandatory application components. To be qualified for funding under this program, applications must meet the following statutory definition of qualified application. An application is deemed qualified if it has been submitted by an eligible applicant, does not propose any activities that may compromise victim safety, including background checks of victims or clinical evaluations to determine eligibility for services, reflects an understanding of dynamics of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking, and does not propose prohibited activities, including mandatory services for victims. If an applicant is a victim service provider, the application must include at least one other organization. An example is a housing provider, local homelessness coalition, or other social service provider serving low-income households, including community colleges, workforce centers, community action agencies, public assistance departments, and so forth. As a required partner identified in the Memorandum of Understanding, or otherwise known as MOU agreement. If an applicant is a tribe, state, or unit of local government, the application must include both a victim service provider, see below, and a housing provider as required partners, and may include the other types of partners listed on this slide, identified in the Memorandum of Understanding. If an applicant is an organization including a domestic violence and sexual assault coalition, other nonprofit, non-governmental organization, or community-based and culturally specific organization that has a documented history of effective work with survivors of DVAWA crimes, which is domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and dating violence, the application must include at least one other organization, such as a housing partner, local homelessness coalition, and so forth, as a required partner identified in the Memorandum of Understanding. Let's talk a little bit about victim service provider. A victim service provider is a nonprofit, non-governmental, or tribal organization or rape crisis center, including a state or tribal domestic violence or sexual assault coalition that assists or advocates for domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking victims. This can include domestic violence shelters, faith-based organizations, and other organizations who have a documented history of effective work concerning domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Victim service providers must provide direct services to victims of the 4 crimes we've talked about during our call: domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, or dating violence, as one of their primary purposes, and have a demonstrated history of effective work in this field. The victim service provider partner must play an active role in the development and the implementation of the project. Applications from a tribe, state, or unit of local government must demonstrate that a victim service provider is significantly involved in the project design and development and review of all policies and procedures, and describe how the applicant will ensure that anyone working with transitional housing survivors is trained in working with victims of VAWA crimes. I'll now go ahead and pass it off to my colleague, Charlena Brady, to talk about application contents.
Thank you. Okay, your application must include a summary data sheet, an abstract, a proposal narrative, a budget detail worksheet and narrative, a memorandum of understanding, also known as the MOU, and the letter of experience, also known as the LOE. Summary data sheet. The summary data sheet questionnaire is a required element and must be fully completed and submitted to successfully apply for this program. Applicants must respond to each question. The abstract is worth 5 points total. The abstract will be entered into just grants. It must provide a short summary, no more than 2 pages double-spaced, of the proposed project, including names of the applicant and partners, the project title, the purpose of the project, including goal and intended outcome, primary activities for which funds are requested, who will benefit, including geographic area to be served, product and deliverables, and how the applicant will measure progress in completing project goals and objectives. The project narrative is worth 60 points total. The project narrative includes the following sections and optional priority areas. The project narrative may not exceed 25 pages or 26 to 27 pages for applications addressing one or more priority areas. The project abstract and summary data sheet are not a part of the 25-page limit for the project narrative. The first section is the purpose of application, worth 20 points. Should describe the problem to be addressed and how funding would alleviate it, the target population, and how the target population would benefit. The what will be done section is worth 30 points and should describe the project goals and objectives and timeline, describing the specific tasks and activities necessary for accomplishing each. The who will implement the project section is worth 10 points and should describe organizations and people responsible for implementing the project. As a reminder, the priority areas are 1, to expand economic justice and financial advocacy for survivors of sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking, including as a tool for violence prevention. Or 2, projects primarily serving underserved populations. Okay, the budget detail worksheet and narrative. All applications must include a detailed budget and budget narrative. See the sample budget detail worksheet and the Creating a Budget webinar available on the OVW website. Keep in mind that budgetary requirements vary among programs. Applicants must submit reasonable budgets based on the resources needed to implement their projects in their specific geographic location. The budget and budget narrative will be reviewed separately from the proposed project narrative. The budget narrative must describe each line item requested in the budget and explain all costs included in the budget, including how the cost of goods and services are determined and how they will fulfill the objectives of the project. The budget must, first, display a clear link between the specific project activities and the proposed budget items, and not contain items that are not supported by the project narrative. 2, include funds to attend OVW-sponsored training and technical assistance in the amount of $15,000 for applicants located in the 48 contiguous states and $20,000 for applicants located in the territories, Hawaii, and Alaska. This amount is for the entire 36-month project period and not per year. Applicants may also budget expenses in excess of the required amount if they are aware of relevant non-OVW sponsored conferences or trainings for which they would like permission to use grant funds to support staff and project partner attendance. 3, include a statement describing whether the housing units are applicant-owned. Next, include any fees charged to transitional housing participants if the transitional housing units are applicant-owned as program income. Please include funds or describe other resources available to the applicant to support activities to ensure access for individuals with disabilities, deaf, hard of hearing individuals, and persons with limited English proficiency. See accessibility under Federal Award Administration information for more information. Include sufficient funds to fully provide language access or describe resources available to the applicant to ensure meaningful access for persons who are limited in their English proficiency because of their natural origin. See accessibility under the Federal Award Administration information section of this solicitation for more information. Include sufficient funds, ensure that any legal assistance costs do not exceed 10% of total project costs. And lastly, distinguish clearly between subawards and contracts in allocating any grant funds to other entities. The Memorandum of Understanding. It's worth 15 points total. All applications must include a new MOU that is responsive to this solicitation. The purpose of the MOU is to allow applicants to demonstrate that their proposed projects will be developed by a team of collaborative partners. Remember required partnership and role of victim service provider in the program eligibility requirements section. The MOU should be very specific and mirror the project as described in the project narrative and budget. The MOU should be a single document, currently dated and signed by the authorized representative of each partner agency. The letter of experience is worth 10 points total. All applicants must submit a signed and currently dated LOE describing the applicant organization's documented history of effective work concerning violent crimes or such experience and capacity of a partner, if the applicant is a tribe, state, or unit of local government. The LOE must address the following. Describe how serving survivors of violent crimes is one of the primary purposes of your application. Describe the applicant organization's history of providing assistance to survivors of violent crimes. State the number of years, must be at least 3 or more years, the organization has provided direct services to victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Describe the direct services provided to victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Describe the qualifications or skills of staff assigned to the grant and the training they have received. Describe how services are structured and implemented to specifically address the issues facing victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Applications from a tribe, state, or unit of local government must include a letter of experience from their victim service provider partner. In addition to the above information, the letter must make clear how the victim service provider will be involved in the implementation of the proposed project. The LOE must contain the following formatting. It's limited to 2 pages. Any additional pages will not be reviewed or considered. It must be on an agency letterhead. It must have current dates for 2024. Any letters of experience that have dates from before the current application year, before 2024, will not be accepted and can remove the application from consideration. Your LOE must be signed by the victim service provider agency representative. If an LOE is submitted that does not contain the above mentioned formatting criteria, the application may be disqualified and removed from any further consideration of funding. Sharon will now go over the application and submission information with you.
Thanks, Charlena. Let's begin with the limit on number of applications. OVW will consider only one application per organization for the same service area. In addition, if an applicant submits multiple versions of the same application, OVW will review only the most recent system-validated version submitted before the deadline. Formatting and technical requirements. Applications must follow the formatting and technical requirements outlined on page 12 of the solicitation. Double-spaced, 8.5 by 11-inch paper, 1-inch margins, type no smaller than 12 point times New Roman or Arial font, except for footnotes, which may be in 10-point font. Include page numbers and headings and subheadings that correspond to the sections identified in this section of the solicitation. Word documents in the following formats: Microsoft Word, PDF files, or text documents. No more than 25 pages for the proposal narrative. Submission and deadline information. After applicants register with the System for Award Management, also known as SAM, they can begin the grants.gov registration process. The applying organization must complete the grants.gov registration process prior to beginning an application for a federal grant. The e-business point of contact, also known as e-biz POC, must register the applicant organization with grants.gov. In Just Grants, each applying entity will have an assigned entity administrator who is responsible for managing entity level information and assigning roles in the system. The entity administrator is also the e-biz POC designated in sam.gov. See the Just Grants website for more information on registering with Just Grants. It is the applicant's responsibility to ensure that the application is complete and submitted by the deadline. Failure to meet the submission deadline will result in an application not being considered for funding. Applicants should refer to the list on page 21 of the solicitation to ensure that all required steps and deadlines are met. Failure to begin registration or application submission by the deadlines is not an acceptable reason for late submission. Obtain a DUNS number. Register with SAM. Once the SAM registration is active, The applicant will be able to complete the grants.gov registration. Register with grants.gov, submit your letter of intent by March 19th, 2024 to the Transitional Housing mailbox. And that mailbox address is ovw.transitionalhousing@usdoj.gov. Download an updated version of Adobe Acrobat at least 48 hours before the grants.gov deadline. Applicants are responsible for ensuring that the most up-to-date version of Adobe Acrobat is installed on all computers that may be used to download the solicitation and to submit the SF424 and SFLLL on grants.gov. Go to the Adobe software compatibility page to verify that the Adobe software version is compatible with grants.gov. Submission and deadline information continues. Submit the SF424 and SFLLL in grants.gov as early as possible, but no later than 24 to 48 hours prior to the grants.gov deadline. Register the entity administrator and the application submitter with Just Grants as early as possible, but no later than 48 to 72 hours before the Just Grants deadline. Submit the complete application package at least 24 to 48 hours prior to the Just Grants deadline and confirm application receipt. Submitting the application components at least 48 hours before each deadline, grants.gov or Just Grants, as applicable, will enable the applicant to receive notice of a failed submission and provide an opportunity to correct the error before the applicable deadline. Christina will now tell you about the basic minimum requirement review and some other helpful information. Christina?
Thank you, Sharon. Basic minimum requirements. All applications undergo basic minimum requirement, BMR, review to determine if the application will move forward to peer review. This is the first of 4 stages that any application can go through during the review process to determine if the applicant is proposing a project that meets the requirements outlined to receive funding. Applications missing any of the following elements will be removed from further consideration and not forwarded to peer review. Project narrative, budget narrative and detailed worksheets, complete MOU, single document, can include multiple signature pages as long as each page includes name and title of all signatories to the MOU. Currently signed and dated within the application period in 2024. Required partnerships, letter of experience, LOE, single document signed and currently dated within the application period in 2024. Other information and helpful tips. Read the solicitation in its entirety before applying. Follow the solicitation. The information in the application should be detailed as possible. Continuation applicants should write the application as if this was the first time that OVW has ever heard of their project. Ensure that each section is completely addressed, even if it feels redundant. Number all pages. Fully name and limit the use of acronyms included in the application. Information submitted beyond what is required in the solicitation is likely not to be read by OVW staff or peer reviewers. The OVW website contains information on transitional housing models and rent structures. Please utilize the FY24 Solicitation Companion Guide. Visit justice.usdoj.gov for helpful guidance on application submission. Questions. If you have any questions, please email us at ovw.transitionalhousing@usdoj.gov. We will now open up for a Q&A session. If you have any questions, please submit them in the Q&A. Thank you.
Alrighty, it looks like we had some questions in the chat that we wanted to cover live, so I'll be asking my lovely teammates to help me answer these questions that we've received throughout our presentation today. The first question we received was regarding the 6-month minimum timeline. How does that apply to services that help pay someone's security deposit? That is a one-time payment, so would not meet the 6-month minimum. Our first thought was to pay a deposit that offers 6 months of ongoing services to the participant, but we realized that participation in services cannot be mandatory for the grant. So how can security deposits be paid without violating the minimum timeline?
So Kelly, is the applicant asking if they make a security or pay a security deposit and the survivor only remains there for 6 months is a problem? Is that what they're asking? I don't see the question. So
Oh, sorry. So I think the
I
question.
I see it. Thank you.
Yeah, no
I see
worries.
it.
I think that the question might be if we can use our funds to pay security deposits, and the person who asked this question can clarify. But as far as my understanding of this award, it is not allowable to only contribute security deposits as the only form of housing support for this program.
That would be correct.
Yes. So if that did not answer your question, folks who are joining today, feel free to please re-ask the question or follow up with additional details in the chat so we can make sure you get your question answered. But based on the information that is presented in the question as it is, paying the security deposit on its own would not be allowable under this award. It would have to be security deposit and then ongoing housing and supportive services provided through the award. The next question is, can funds be used to build tiny homes for transitional housing, or is it not permitted for new construction at all?
Innovative idea, but can't be used for construction at all.
Thank you. Can you better explain the distinct differences between transitional housing versus short-term assistance? For short-term, is just aid provided, or does a facility need to be provided as well? We might need a little bit more clarification around this question. For our program, transitional housing is considered the 6 to 24 months. The distinction would be short-term assistance is because it's not long-term permanent housing or support. So that might be the distinction there. I don't know if team has any other thoughts on that question.
Yeah. In short, I was going to say short-term assistance is for that 6 to 24 months, but it might be that you're paying rent on a lease for that period of time, as opposed to having a transitional housing facility that your either program owns or is already in existence and they're not paying rent. They have someplace to, an apartment or, as we said, communal living situation. So that differs that from a rental assistance, security deposit, childcare and support services.
Thank you for
And
that.
again, for the 6 to 24-month period.
Yes, thank you for that clarification because our award does not require a program operate their own housing. They can use third-party landlord rented units through our award.
Next one, would this OVW program support a transitional housing program as a continuation of shelter programming that itself requires participation in services while in the shelter, but which are in volunteer or are volunteer in the transitional housing phase of victims' lives?
This would be very tricky. Our program specifically states this program cannot be used for extended shelter stay.
Thank you, Marta.
We do have a follow-up about the security deposit question. So what has to last 6 months minimum? Is it the entire program in general or support given to each participant? If we pay a security deposit, do we then need to continue to provide services to that participant for 6 months? The answer to that question is yes. So our program is designed in the way that the person who is enrolling into the transitional housing program would be offered 6 to 24 months of housing and supportive services. So that could be either program-owned units or third-party rented units through a private landlord. But so that would be the service that is ongoing for the 6 to 24-month period is the housing, and then any other case management, economic empowerment work, housing advocacy, and all of those other services that programs create to help survivors reach self-sufficiency and autonomy. And to follow up, yes, that is correct, that services cannot be made mandatory. This is a voluntary services program. So folks are not required to participate as a means to remain housed in their program.
Okay. Is a double and triple security deposit an allowable use of funds? Oftentimes, landlords require a significantly increased security deposit amount for survivors who we work with.
I'm gonna say double, triple security deposit is not allowed. Secure deposit is a specific item to hold an apartment or a house or what that may be. I'm thinking, and I'm just stretching this from double to triple to being, if they request first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit, it may be of the same amount, but they are for different purposes, which again is something like a first month's rent, last month's rent, and security deposit. Also, if you encounter a landlord who is increasing security because of the survivor you're working with, I would question that as discrimination and be looking very closely at that and how that is impacting your program, because there should not be discrimination on that level.
Thank you. Legal assistance does not apply to legal advocacy services, for example, court accompaniment, prep for court cases, etc.
No.
Can you speak more to permanent housing? How is this determined?
Permanent housing is the goal of this program, is to move a participant from a temporary structure, which is a temporary placement in a home, to where they're self-sufficient. Permanent housing is considered where the client is able to be self-sufficient, able to pay or maintain their household by themselves and do so for a period going into the future, that there's not assistance with the program to help them maintain that residence.
Thanks, Marta.
I just have a quick follow-up question. So if a survivor departs the program prior to the completion of the initial 6 months, this particular applicant would like to know if there's a penalty to that program if the survivor leaves before they complete 6 months.
There is no penalty to the program. The offering of 6 to 24 months is the requirement for the program. Sometimes survivors will exit early for a variety of reasons, but there's no penalty to the program when that happens.
Thank you.
To qualify for TH program statutory priority area, primarily serve underserved populations. Does that mean for the entire program or for the portion of the program of the grant series? So if the grant accounted for 30% of our TH clients, does this apply only to them or everyone served by the program as a whole? On page 7.
Your priority area applies to everyone served by the program as a whole.
What about services to children whose parents are in TH? Are full services provided to children allowable and/or a children's advocate that supports TH clients' children? What about other advocates or shelter advocates who help clients find transitional, more permanent housing when we do not have room at our TH facility?
You can provide services to children in the program as long as their parent or legal guardian is receiving services in your program.
Thank you. If applying in a priority area, does the additional $50,000 need to be specifically budgeted toward the priority area? We want to apply under the underserved population priority area and have a project partner who doesn't have special expertise with that population. If we as a lead applicant have expertise and a history of service provision to that population, do we have to add another partner that also has expertise?
No.
Clinical evaluations jeopardize victim safety. Meant those are those done by certified therapists or case managers doing intake or ongoing evaluations.
I don't understand the question.
The clinical evaluations, if this is in reference to like when your eligibility criteria, like you can't use an evaluation as a means to accept someone into your program. I'm not sure if that's what.
Yeah, so it sounds like does using a certified therapist or case manager do intake, who's doing intake, ongoing evaluations, jeopardize victim safety?
Right, that can't be used to determine eligibility if that's the question they're asking.
Mhm. If an organization currently owns a transitional housing and also provides support services, do we need to establish an MOU? Is all the services are being done in-house?
Yes.
Yeah.
If the agency has an expert come to hold sessions to support economic empowerment, or do they need to be associated with the agency that provides services in those areas?
No, you can have a consultant on your grant.
Okay. Is extremely low income considered underserved populations?
I would say it's up to you to supply the data or the information to establish that as an underserved population.
and then also had a follow-up to it. Can an underserved population be size of a family, such as women who have four plus children, making it difficult to assess services?
I think the same answer applies there. That would be for you to do, to be able to to submit a proposal that makes the case for that this is an underserved population.
Okay, if a project partner normally does this service, employment counseling, are we required to compensate?
You are required to compensate your MOU partner unless they are, I think, a government entity and the services provided by them are in their normal course of work.
And that should also be outlined in your MOU and within your application as well.
We have a current signed MOU in place with our partners that was created outside the scope of this application, but complies with the required components. Is that sufficient to meet the MOU requirements?
As long as it is currently signed and dated and pertaining to this OVW transitional housing program, your project specifically, then yes.
If our program serves women
Mhm.
victims, how does having to offer services to all, but not all people not in danger or threaten or make them women feel unsafe? I do not understand this requirement of the VACA. I think it means VAWA.
I don't know if I get that question.
Yeah,
I
I
think
don't.
Question
I'm
is
gonna,
to voluntary services as the not mandating services as part of our requirement.
I'm going to guess, and I'm only guessing if somebody wants to clarify more, that if our program serves women victims and having offer services to all people, I'm not sure that, I think you're broadening the all people to different victims. Our program is for DV victims or stalking, sexual assault, and not necessarily so that any victim of a crime can be served. Understanding the dynamics behind these crimes is essential so that, again, I think we're a little bit, how do you call it? Penned by this question because you don't serve it to the public in general. It's very specific to victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking. And the dynamics behind that make it clear that you have to work in a manner that's confidential. So it would endanger if you're just opening it up to everybody. But that's what I'm getting from the question. But if you want to clarify that a little bit more, I'd be happy to consider another explanation.
Okay. Is there an income limit for this program? Are units rented by clients required to meet fair market rent rates? Can this grant pay for startup move-in costs such as furniture? Can it pay for movers to help clients move in? Are rent reasonable documents required to be completed once leased?
Okay, so I'll answer. There is no income limit for this program. The income limit is 0. Are units rented by clients required to meet fair market rates? No, they're reasonable. Within fair market rate is just a manner by which to help you, the grantee, help assess what is in the area. But it's a tool. It's not a mandatory thing to go by. Can this pay for startup move-in costs such as furniture? The furniture that you can pay for, but it must remain with the agency or grantee. It is not to buy furniture for each client so they can take or leave with that furniture or remain in that property. It is for the agency to store, to keep, to move to different locations if needed, but it remains the property of the agency. Yes, you can pay for movers to help clients. Again, that's a little bit dicey again, but if they're moving their furniture or what they've acquired while they're in transitional housing, and you need them moved to a permanent area, yes, you may use that funding for that. Are rent reasonable documents required to be completed once leased? I'm not familiar with that. I'm gonna say no. A lease is what, yeah, a lease documents are what the agency has. If it's a programmed own, is what's required. I think rent reasonable documents are under HUD, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, fair market value is usually used by HUD.
This is not HUD.
Yep. I will also add, and you can correct me if I'm mistaken, but we also don't have occupancy limits or maximums, and so you can find units that in other grant funds might exceed the total number of tenants if there's a reason that the survivor needs a unit that is larger than how many folks are staying there. So one 2-bedroom for a single person if they have reasons for needing a space that large.
Thank you. Do we need to ensure that project partners, for example, housing provider, are trained to work with survivors?
Yes.
Is it true that we have to do the grants.gov process first before we can register for Just Grants? I went to Just Grants and I see no place to sign up. Another grantee told me that you have to do the grants.gov portion first and complete the SF-424 and lobbying document first.
Absolutely. Correct.
Is there a
Okay.
matching requirement?
I'm so sorry, if I can just step back for 1 second. The beginnings, so the first step is outlined in step 1 on page 2 that talks about the grants.gov registration and those 2 forms. So go ahead and take a look at page 2 under step 1, because there are very specific deadlines for that piece that are different than the final application package. So make sure you take a look at that.
Thank you, Kelly.
If someone is already housed, can we use funds to pay 6 months of rent?
No, they have to be homeless or in need of housing.
If they're, yes,
to be
if they're
under
housed,
the
they're
program.
not homeless.
If the security deposit is significantly increased, is that allowable?
Can you say that again?
If the security deposit is significantly increased, is that allowable?
Is it being significantly increased because it's a survivor that is moving into the unit? Because if there's some difference between survivor and non-survivor, if the security deposit is different based upon those circumstances, then no, it wouldn't be allowable.
This is Stephanie. Could I speak to that? It was my question that came in.
Sure.
So the situation we run into is the survivors that we oftentimes support with accessing housing. They have evictions on their backgrounds and or credit isn't where it needs to be, things like that. And so oftentimes what landlords will do, and I appreciate the insight earlier that it potentially could be considered discrimination, but it certainly is happening, is that as soon as our survivors' income isn't where they want it to be, their credit isn't where they want it to be, and or they have had evictions on their background, they will say in order to house the survivor, we are going to require a double or triple security deposit. And so that is usually the situation, and why I asked the question is oftentimes the only way landlords will work with housing our survivors due to their low credit limits, past eviction record, and or other barriers, they would require a double or triple security deposit.
Is that their practice across the board, though? That's what I'm asking. You know, is it their practice that if someone, regardless of them, of it being a survivor, if the person has all of these other deficiencies around credit and income and so forth, is it their practice to require a triple security deposit?
That's a good question. I would say the only experience that I know is that we even have some folks that don't identify as survivors that we still support with housing advocacy efforts, and those things would still apply. But I don't ever see anything like in writing or anything like on the landlord or property management companies that say anything like that. It usually happens via like negotiations with the landlord in order to get the person housed.
Yeah. That can be kind of tricky. So I'm going to say yes, because we do know those situations exist across the board. But as long as it's not a difference, but you know, if the difference being survivor or non-survivor, and that rule or action is being implemented, I would say yes. Pay the higher security deposit because the person that's moving in has these deficiencies.
Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying.
Alrighty. The next question is, can you speak more on how to determine for whom emergency shelter services or other crisis intervention services are unavailable or insufficient?
Can you read that again? I'm sorry.
Oh, sure thing. Can you speak more on how to determine for whom emergency shelter services or other crisis intervention services are unavailable or insufficient?
That occurs usually around, for example, if there's no more availability at domestic violence, let's say domestic violence or rape crisis center for shelter. If there's no safe housing in the area within a mile that they can get to, in which case then you may be able to offer a client transitional housing at that point.
And I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the insufficient would mean if their needs exceeded what emergency shelter opportunities in their community could provide.
Yes.
So let me know if that answers your question in the chat. The next question is, can other women not recipients of OVW transitional housing participate in provided support services?
Other women, not recipients. So for our program, in order for there to be the provision of anything, the survivor would be enrolled in the transitional housing program and receiving both housing and support services.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to say no to the way this question is, understanding what I think the person is asking. So it's going to be no, because in order to be in this program, they have to be recipients of both housing and support services.
Maybe if you don't mind my explaining the question, if we are if we provide support services, some support services, for example, let's say economic related, might be
Mhm.
group services. And since they're voluntary, we might announce them and invite the participants from the transitional housing project. And some of them might participate, but some other women that we serve who are not participants from the transitional housing might be interested and show up for the service. That's what I'm trying to consider, whether they would be welcome to participate in something that is offered as a group to all of the transitional housing participants, but since it's voluntary, there might be space and some of them might not show up or not be interested. I'm not sure.
I see what you mean. Okay, yes. It sounds like you're providing a service and you have you have survivors in your program that are receiving housing and support services. You have others in your program not funded by us, but you're asking, I'm understanding that you're asking if those folks who are not necessarily enrolled in our program could attend this particular group session. Would that be your question? Is
Yeah,
that your question?
that's the type of scenario I'm trying to consider, right?
No.
Okay. Based upon that, I would say yes, because it sounds like you have like two groups there, one that's OVW funded and maybe one that's not, but here's the service for everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Alrighty.
I'm sorry. May I just jump in? I have a similar question along those lines.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. So we have a shelter program and a transitional housing program. And so with a lot of our shelter clients, we are preparing them to find long-term housing. And so if the advocates that are working with the shelter clients are specifically working with them to find stable housing after their time in the program, is that allowable?
I'm gonna say you need to make very clear demarcation between your shelter services and the transitional housing services. And that transitional housing can't be used for emergency or shelter services. So if they're in shelter and you're preparing them for long-term, that's still considered shelter services and not for them to be paid or your shelter advocates to be paid for with transitional housing funds. If you are and you find housing for them, that's transitional housing and support service simultaneously, and you can delineate that clearly. And it might be that you own apartments or housing or such, and they can move into that situation, and you can clearly define that this is transitional housing. And again, it's voluntary. They have support services. They're going to remain for 6 to 24 months. Then you can determine that that's a transitional housing program. And that is okay, that's fine. But I think you're getting a little blurry as to, oh, we're moving them over to this. So is the shelter advocate a transitional housing person or emergency services person? Who's paying them? That's, I think what I'm hearing, that's not clear.
Right. And I think the main thing, so we have advocates that support people in shelter and also transitional housing. And so we could cost allocate that time, perhaps, is what I'm hearing.
Let me just say, keep very clear documentation.
I see a hand.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I said that's my recommendation. Keep very clear documentation if that's what you choose to do.
Very clear, Doc. Okay, thank you.
I see a hand raised.
Yes, my name is Leslie with Genesee Center. And we too, we have a shelter where the clients, emergency shelter, they stay there up to 45 days. Once we assess them, we have a totally different location that is our transitional housing. They still don't pay rent, but we have a whole nother staff that's dedicated totally and fully to those transitional housing clients, where we still provide them with the support services and then also work with them to move towards permanent housing. Now, we do allow them to stay at our transitional shelter up to 24 months. So are we in compliance to what you and the services they are asked if they want to, is totally voluntarily, to participate in any of the classes that may be mixed with both emergency shelter clients and transitional clients, but we do have separate sign-in sheets and everything else to denote that these are our transitional clients versus our emergency clients participating in the group classes. Are we in alignment with what is required for this grant?
I'm not for sure, but I'm hearing that they're staying in the shelter. So is it that they have a bed? Do they have a room?
Yes, they have their own individual apartments, but we don't ask any money of them. It's all still free.
So they have their own individual apartment. They're not sharing a room with other shelter. It's not just
No.
a bed or a closet. They have their dedicated area room, like you said, an apartment. That's
Yes.
considered, that's fine. It's in the shelter, you're saying, or is it part of the shelter?
It's a totally separate, like
Good.
it's 3 miles away from, well, actually 1 mile away from our emergency shelter. And then we have a whole nother apartment complex, 15 units.
That's called, yeah, that would be clustered, that would be considered clustered housing.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
Alrighty. We have some more questions that came in through the chat. So applicants seeking to apply for both priority areas listed should submit budgets for up to 600,000, allocating 50,000 per priority area addressed for the 36-month period. That is correct. If you are looking to apply for one of the two priority areas, then your total budget for the 36 months would be $550,000. If you apply for both priorities 1 and 2, then you would complete your budget to have a total of $600,000 for that 36-month period. The budget should be submitted for the complete award period of 36 months. And so I hope that answers your question. I also see another hand raised.
Hello, I think that might be me. Good afternoon. My name is Olivia with Self Enhancement. We provide culturally specific services to Black and African American survivors of sexual and domestic violence. My question is, for our application, we're considering scattered site 6 to 24-month rental assistance programs that have to be brought to our local coordinated access system. Are we able to identify a priority population for households that are submitted for our programming? Maybe I should provide some context, meaning when we're bringing this to the system for survivors to be submitted, are we able to say we are prioritizing Black and African American families?
I wouldn't say prioritizing Black and African American families. If that's the clients that come through your doors are primarily, and you wish to look at that priority as an underserved population, then yes, you can look to see about meeting that criteria for that population that you're servicing. So the thing to look at is if you have the the partners or the expertise to deal with the different issues that are singular to the population you're working with. If you have the partners that work with that population, if you have different, how do you call it? Any different needs that they have that you're aware of that you can address, and that you can speak to in your proposal on how that prioritizes their needs, because they're coming through your doors, and that's what you're working to help. You're working to help create an environment where they can successfully move to autonomous and independent life. Yeah, that's what you're looking to do. That would be able to address a priority area under underserved populations.
Okay, is it okay if I kind of follow up a little bit?
I'm so sorry, due to time, we're actually going to have to limit the number of hands raised, and so we're going to conclude the hand raising portion. And so if you want to continue the question in the chat, I'd appreciate that, just so we can make sure that we are allocating enough time for the pre-submitted questions. I appreciate your understanding. Thank you. Are there county limit and state limit requirements for this grant? No. If you are applying within a state, you can use the funds to serve throughout the state. And let me know if that does not answer your question. How can we demonstrate an understanding of the dynamics of sexual assault, domestic violence, and stalking? Typically this, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Kelly, please.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that typically that information is what you would include by answering the questions that are outlined in the letter of experience section of the solicitation. Is there something else that you were going to add, Mirta?
No, I was just going to say it in answering exactly what you said in a different way. Just
Okay.
By answering those questions, that information comes out.
Got you. Do we need to have a partner if we have a housing specific program, or will we only need a partner if the program is not housing specific? All applications must include an MOU partner. So the partner can include any range of services that are described in the solicitation, but there are requirements if your program does not provide, either have the victim services requirement or the housing requirement, so, or component. So be sure to read that section around required partnerships, because it is a mandatory portion of our program. We received OVW transitional housing funding in 2018 and 2021. Does this affect our application? And I'll defer to my team for that.
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
I was going to say, it only affects your application if you have more than 50% of your funds remaining and you're thinking of applying for this year. If you do have more than 50% of your application, I would suggest that you wait and look up on how you're going to disperse of those funds in the following year and look to apply at another time. However, if you have less than 50% of your funding, then by all means, apply.
Excellent. We primarily service domestic violence. We primarily service domestic violence victims. Do we need to serve sexual assault victims through the TH program?
No. And I will add, go for your strengths when you apply, and be clear when you apply. Don't say we will address domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and dating violence if you're not going to. If you keep repeating that, we will be looking for you to address domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, and dating violence victims. And they all have, these crimes have different dynamics, have different needs, have different clients or survivors to address. And we'll expect that to see that throughout your application if you address more than one or two or three, and that you're familiar and you know how to meet their needs. if you can, that is excellent. We'd love to see that and make sure that's supported in your proposal. If that is not your strength, and is that not you intend on doing, then be very direct and careful about how you're going to direct a proposal on how you're going to meet the needs of these victims.
And I'll just add that it is, you are able, as if you're a domestic violence service provider, you are able to partner with a local rape crisis or sexual assault services provider to provide those services to victims who are coming to your program that would like to access transitional housing services. So you can address that need that way. Okay, so something I wanted to clarify, because it's come up a couple of times, there is a civil rights provision within our solicitation that states that our services are available to all survivors who are of all identities and sexual orientations and backgrounds. And so to answer the question that was in the chat, can we also serve transgender women? Yes, our program is open and available to any survivor of any identity. Okay, I think we've caught up. Regarding transitional housing, does the client have to move out of this housing to permanent housing? Can the transitional become permanent? Yes, that is an outcome that can happen with the scattered site model. We have a couple of other questions in the chat. Can funds be used to reunify mothers who have lost their children after fleeing their abusers? I'll defer to the team on this.
I have to say that has not, we'll have to defer and look at that anytime. That has not been to our, something that we've done that I can think of. I think that might be under legal, if that's something under representation that might occur. But through housing, we haven't seen that before.
Yes, but those are all things that can be discussed if an award is made with your grant manager.
Yes.
Are Ubers and Lyfts an allowable expense for client transportation? And are those gift cards allowable for client transportation needs?
Yes. We don't favor gift cards, but yes, you can pay for transportation through Uber, Lyft, taxi, bus.
Excellent. Regarding qualifying victim service providers, we have been providing DV survivor support and housing services for approximately 5 years. But that program is one of many programs and services at our agency. Does that qualify as our primary purpose?
I'm going to say, I would say look under victim service providers. It's not that you come across victim service, you come across survivors or assist survivors, but that is one of your primary objectives or the mission of your program. So I would look at victim service provider language. I don't remember under what page that is on the thing. I know Charlene spoke to it. Yes, I would look to that and see how strongly you work with survivors and understanding the dynamics of DV, sexual assault or stalking, and then if your programming speaks to that. I'm not going to say no, but it's rare that you have a very open mission and that DV victims are your primary or your sexual assault victims are your primary, client or focus, I should say. But I'm not going to, I can't say for how strongly you work with them or how much they are a concern of your programming.
Thank you. So we had a question around the number 1 and number 2 funding levels found on page 10 of the solicitation. And those are in reference to providing housing and supportive services for the total amount of $500,000, and then offering supportive services only for $400,000. So the distinction there, to clarify, is that the additional funds provided under section 1 of that, which is the housing and supportive services, so that additional funds are to provide the housing for the program participants. So if you were applying for supportive services only, then you would not be awarded any additional funds to provide housing. And so you would have to find alternative means to supply the housing to the participants. If you apply under the section, the number 1, which is housing and supportive services, then you can apply for those additional funds to pay for the housing portion, which could be scattered site or any clustered or communal as listed in the presentation. Let me know if that answers your question. What does reporting look like for the grant period? In other words, what will programs be expected to track and report back to OVW? Typically, reporting is around the services that are being provided, the funds that are being expended, and more information around reporting requirements will be reviewed with all grantees once awards are made, should you be selected.
And reporting is usually required every 6 months. It's not usually, it is required every 6 months of the 3-year period.
Mhm. Okay. And so we just had a clarifying question around Ubers and Uber gift cards. Would you mind going back over if programs can use gift cards for Uber, or if it's best to have them not use gift cards? If you can discuss that a little bit further.
You were gonna have to track your expenses. Gift cards makes it hard to track expenses, and to who and for what, that's why.
Mhm. So the same would apply for any gift card.
Yes,
So it doesn't mean that they're not unallowable, if I'm correct.
just frowned upon.
I'm sorry?
No, just frowned upon. It's just not a great asset to have, because you have to report back on your finances and keep records, and that's hard to do if you give somebody a gift card and expect them to track what they've used it for. But that's again up to the agency to determine how well they do with that, or how they put that together. But it's just not something I'll just say it's not something we recommend. It's not, you can't do it, it's just not something we recommend that you do.
Yes, I think we direct to vendor is most easiest to track.
Correct.
Okay. All right. As a multi-services, community-based nonprofit, we provide domestic violence services, DV housing services, and other social services, legal services, etc. Would we be able to partner with ourselves, or must still partner with an external partner? The idea would be to partner with an external agency that provides a service that the agency does not already provide, to bridge a gap between services that the grantee cannot provide, that an outside partner could. Okay, so a follow-up question around paying for funding levels. This agency owns the facilities, so that means we are not using funds to pay for units and housing. And I'm going to defer to the team to talk about what funds can be paid for or used to pay for when there's program-owned housing.
There's things like you can pay for maintenance, some maintenance of the property. If you can't charge rent for that, the individual apartments, if that's what you have, or housing. So other areas around that for like utilities, those things you can pay for.
And just to be clear, like it would not be, you couldn't pay for mortgages or other things like that.
You cannot.
The partnership requirement described should also be demonstrated in the applicant's memorandum of understanding and the letter of experience. Do we need both?
Yes.
So should this demonstrate, should also be demonstrated. The partnership requirement should also be demonstrated in the applicant's. You do need both a memorandum of understanding and a letter of experience. Who submits the letter of experience would be dependent on who is providing the direct service. That is correct. There are no income guidelines associated with eligibility for this housing.
Correct.
Okay, so can you answer questions regarding submission dates? The single document LOE is due via email March 9th. The LOE is not due by March 9th, March 19th. The letter of intent is due by March 19th, which is an optional form that you can submit, an optional letter that you can submit by email to the email listed on the screen.
Yes, I tried to correct that. Sorry, I did correct at the bottom, letter of intent.
Yep. So yes, the letter of intent would not be due, the letter of experience is due with your complete application package, which is due April 11th. You are always encouraged to submit earlier to late, if there's any sort of technical difficulty on the grants.gov or Just Grants side, then you would have time to resubmit to avoid any late applications or any delays in submitting your application. So the deadlines are still April 9th for the grants.gov and April 11th for Just Grants. I hope that clarifies your question. Okay. Alrighty, so we are coming to the close of our pre-application session today. I appreciate everybody attending our session and asking these questions. And we are so excited to see that you all are interested in applying for our award. If you have any additional questions, feel free to email the email listed on the PowerPoint slide on your screen, and we will follow up with any information that we can.